This is RTE Radio 1, broadcasting on AM and FM 1. Play of the Week.
We present The Apollo, a film for radio by Martin Duffy.
I love the sound of a projector. A projector is a magic machine that takes separate flecks of time and runs them together to miraculously form the illusion of reality. When you sit in a cinema, half the time you are looking at a blank screen. But that's one of the projector's magic tricks. It knows that the human brain retains an image for a 24th of a second. So it shows you a photograph for that length of time. Then it brings the shutter down. And while you're still seeing the last image, it pulls a new image into frame, opens the shutter, and shows you that. On and on. 24 frames a second, 90 feet of film per minute. A whole world carried on a broken beam of light. I know these things because I'm a projectionist. I'm the projectionist at the Apollo. Every film has its opening sequence. It might be the lone cowboy making his way like James Stewart across the prairies to arrive in a boom town, tall in the saddle, etched against the barren land. My film starts differently. It starts with a daytime exterior shot of a fine old suburban cinema, the Apollo. A sign over the posters for the films on show declares proudly, "We only show films for all the family." Dissolve inside to two minor characters, one a sidekick of the hero, the other a young rawhide learning his trade, the old usher Geoffrey and the trainee usher Sean. It's morning time in the Apollo, but it's the beginning of no ordinary day. Geoffrey and Sean sweep along the rows of seats, clearing away the empty popcorn packs and cigarette boxes, and the dropped sweets matted in the ancient carpet.
Not that way. Not that way. Good Lord.
What's the problem, Geoffrey?
Look at what you're doing, boy. If you make short brushstrokes, you'll simply send dust into the air. This way. This way. This way. You gather the rubbish without disturbing the dust.
Oh, I'm sorry, Geoffrey, sorry.
I did tell you before, Sean.
No, I'm just distracted, you know yourself. Mine's not on the job. I mean, Mr. Maguire must be due back any minute now. And sure, for all we know, we could be out of a job.
We most certainly won't be out of a job. Mr. Maguire has worked 30 years in this cinema, man and boy. He had the same humble beginning as you, a trainee usher, and rose to become the manager. I've known him all that time, and I know his devotion to the Apollo. I know that the late Mr. Kilquade was fully aware of that devotion, and indeed I wouldn't be at all surprised if Mr. Maguire has been bequeathed the cinema.
Go away.
I think it's quite possible. Of course, with payments then made to the family estate.
Could you imagine that now?
The Apollo will always survive. Now, back to work.
Oh, yeah, right. Hey, Geoffrey.
What's the distraction now?
Well, I don't know how I never noticed it before. These seats.
The seats? Yes?
Well, they're brighter and lighter than the others. Newer, like.
Yes.
Well, if you look up, see? The ceiling's above the seats. It's lighter too.
If only your body worked as much as your mind. Yes, I'm aware of the newer seats and the repaired ceiling. It dates back to an incident many years ago. In fact, an incident which reminds me that the Apollo is a special place. There was a projectionist working here. I disliked him intensely. A troublemaker who wanted everyone to join the trade union. and get union pay and conditions.
And what was wrong with that?
Why, Mr. Maguire couldn't run the cinema that way. He'd have to trim down on staff and show those dreadful films people want to see. Out of the question. But the agitator, Michael, he convinced some people, and he brought the Apollo to the brink of a strike.
You don't say. And did it go on for long?
It didn't happen. The day before the strike was due, Michael was up in the cinema attic, walking along the rafters to replace a house light. He missed his footing and fell through the ceiling to his death.
Go way out of that. You're pulling me leg.
Sometimes I think the Apollo has a will of its own. The man got his just deserts.
Geoffrey, Nix, it's Mr. Maguire.
The first appearance of the hero. Often when he first appears, you don't see his face. The hero of my film is Jim Maguire, the manager of the Apollo. A 50-year-old bachelor, he has that kind of quiet, unassuming air that made Audie Murphy a Western star for a while. Jim stands at the door from the foyer. He looks down along the empty rows of seats, and his expressionless face views Geoffrey and Sean. Quietly and calmly, he speaks.
Geoffrey, will you gather the staff in my office, please?
Cut to his office. Favourite publicity stills from films are framed on the wall. His favourite is the still of James Stewart and John Wayne from The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. The staff gather. Geoffrey, Sean, Mrs. Clack. Mrs. Clack, who washes the floors in the morning and sells tickets in the foyer in the evenings. And the projectionist.
I want to inform you all about the reading of Mr. Kilquade's will. You know I have always held Mr. Kilquade in the greatest esteem. Well, his judgment in dealing with his estate has been fair. As you know, Mr. Kilquade has 3 cinemas. He also has 3 sons, so he's bequeathed a cinema each to his sons. The Apollo now belongs to Mr. Kilquade's youngest son, Adrian. Now, this man hasn't been seen for some time. He's lived in London for the past 15 years and, well, didn't come home for his father's funeral. The 2 brothers believe we may never see him, and so I've been instructed to run the Apollo as always. And the brothers will pass on annual accounts and profits to Adrian.
Mr. Maguire, can I ask a question?
Of course, Mrs. Clack.
Does this mean it'll be business as usual with the Apollo?
It does indeed, Mrs. Clack. And we should be very glad. Our world remains our own.
Cue the montage. In the old days, when they wanted to show time passing in a film, they'd flick through the days of a calendar. In the Apollo, the montage shows blessed normality. Kids queuing on a Saturday afternoon, with Geoffrey marshalling them like troops. Near empty houses, showing Jim Maguire's favourite films, as he stands at the back of the cinema, mouthing the words of his favourite scenes. The film flickering through the projector, and the smoke-haunted beam of light spraying onto the screen. Films come and go. Sean learns how to sweep in long strokes. Mrs. Clack washes out the toilets. The Apollo is a haven from reality, and the haven is warm and dark and never changing. But one night, as Geoffrey stands in the foyer and Mrs. Clack sits in the pay kiosk, a tall, dark stranger comes to town.
I want to speak to the manager.
Stalls, £3, balcony, £4. The main feature is starting shortly.
I said I want to speak to the manager.
Sir, I'm sure I can supply any information you may require.
I want to speak to the manager, James Maguire, now.
And would Sir care to explain what this might be in connection with?
Tell him Adrian Kilquade wants to see him right now.
The art of the reaction shot. Geoffrey doesn't say anything. It's all in the way the two look at each other. Geoffrey scurries off to Jim Maguire, who is at the back of the cinema mouthing the words of the film. We don't hear what Geoffrey says, but we see the expression on Jim's face change. The two exit frame, and we cut to Jim's office as he and Adrian sit across from each other.
I want you to know that I admired your father very, very much.
My father was a stubborn old fart, and he's dead. I've come to see just what kind of an inheritance he's left me with.
The premises is yours to inspect, as are the accounts.
I know all about the accounts. I spent the afternoon going over figures with the accountant. This place scrapes along. Beyond depreciation, it barely inches its way into the black.
But it does make a profit. Suburban cinemas are hardly gold mines.
Well, maybe that's because they're mismanaged. Look, Maguire, I didn't come here to make friends or to talk about my dear departed father. I came here to find out how much money I'm going to get out of the will. First thing on my list is to get to the root of why the books say I'll be lucky to have the price of a holiday on the profits of this place. And starting first thing tomorrow morning, you and I are going to sit down and you are going to explain to me exactly how you have been running my cinema.
Your cinema?
Yes. The Apollo is mine. Maybe my father was stupid enough to rely on other people to take care of his investments, but not me. I make the decisions. You understand?
Yes. Yes, I understand.
Now, I've got to meet some friends. I have a lot of catching up to do in Dublin. I'll see you here in my office in the morning.
Film is the world of dreams. And for some people, only dreams are real. For Jim Maguire, no human being, male or female, affected him as much as the giants on the screen. The greater the giant, the more deeply he was affected. And the greatest cinema legend of all was his greatest hero. That night, after the curtain has drawn across the last credits, after the last patrons have set off into the night, Jim goes into the empty cinema as Geoffrey is about to head home.
Good night, sir.
Good night, Geoffrey.
May I ask how your conversation went with Mr. Kilquade?
Hardly his father's son, Geoffrey. Not a pleasant man at all.
Do you foresee problems?
Nothing we and the Apollo can't deal with, Geoffrey. You know life always goes on here, no matter what.
And may I say, sir, that my trust in you is total, as always.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Safe home.
And you, sir. Good night.
Good night.
Film sees everything. The dividing line between reality and imagination fades. For Jim Maguire, after all his years in the Apollo, film has become reality. His world is there and his friends are there. Alone in his cinema, Jim is visited by his only true friend. The screen hero is made celluloid flesh, and the giant image steps from shade to light as a real man. The walk is slow and noble. The shoulder tilts. The hat sits squarely above the powerful face. He stands beside Jim as if both were at the bar of a saloon, or leaning against a fence reviewing a sprawling ranch.
Howdy, Jim.
Howdy, Duke.
Seems to me you're facing into a wind that's carrying trouble.
I don't understand how such a fine man as Mr. Kilquade could produce such a cold son.
A man goes his own way in life, and I don't reckon the road he chooses has anything to do with anyone else. I never could figure what makes a man turn bad, but it happens.
The Apollo is what matters. You know we always keep it the same. We don't want change, and we don't need change.
I say you gotta hear a man out before you judge him. The Apollo is your town, Jim. You're the sheriff here, and the folks look to you to keep the peace. If a stranger comes in, you gotta ask him to hand over his gun before you make him hand it over.